In the next 30 minutes, there's one big shower. Manuel, I'm told he's a very nice boy. Here he is, Mike Yarwood.
Mike Yarwood was one of the greatest TV stars of the 1970s and 80s.
Thank you and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show.
In a way, he was the nation's jester.
Go away, I'm not coming out.
His impressions of everyone from Ken Dodd...
What a beautiful day. What a beautiful day today, ladies.
...to Prince Charles...
As you know, this is my very first Christmas message to the nation.
...led him to be called the man of 1,000 famous faces.
Hello, Betty.
Of the Impressionists, he was the governor.
It was the ultimate accolade. If Mike Yarwood's doing you, you've arrived.
A staple of British TV screens for almost 4 decades, his Christmas show from 1977, with guests Paul McCartney and Wings, remains the most-watched light entertainment programme in British TV history.
The size of the TV audience, I mean, you'll never get those figures again.
He seems like a nice boy.
Here before us was a genius, a shape-shifting wizard.
#1 on British TV, Saturday night, and then he just seemed to vanish. People almost stopped talking about him. You know, what happened to him?
Featuring never-before-seen photos and archive of Mike Yarwood at home and at work, and rare recordings of him discussing his life and craft.
For the first time I did a Royal Variety, I have never been so terrified in all my life.
Being a shy and unassuming man, his great success was at odds with his true personality.
The real man is elusive.
And at the height of his fame, he battled stage fright and alcoholism.
I was working too much, and my drinking was out of control most of the time.
This is the extraordinary story of Mike Yarwood, the man who quite literally changed the face of Saturday night television forever.
Tributes have been paid to the comedian and impersonator Mike Yarwood, who has died at the age of 82.
After many years away from our screens, on September the 8th, 2023, Mike Yarwood was once again making headlines. His sudden death, which happened halfway through the filming of this documentary, led to an outpouring of love from the public and celebrities alike.
Fellow impressionist Roy Bremner said he was recording a tribute to him just hours before he learned of his death. He describes the comedian as the governor and the court jester of the golden age of TV.
Now his 2 daughters, Claire and Charlotte, are going on a journey to learn more about their dad's career and find the answers to why he suddenly quit showbiz and gave up the limelight.
This was where we played.
When the Rag and Bone Man came?
I do remember that, yes. I remember these 2 windows being and the little front door.
It all started here for Mike Yarwood, in the family home in Bredbury, Cheshire. At the house already is Royston Mayo, the man who first discovered Mike Yarwood when he was working in a clothes shop in the 60s, and it was a meeting that would change his life forever.
I was told to go into the selling game because I had the gift of the gab. I remember the teacher saying, Yarwood, you've got the gift of the gab, go and sell. It was while I was at this firm that I was encouraged by people who I worked with to go into the entertainment profession.
I came to this house and I met this young man who was your dad. Your father's impression of his dad was hysterical.
Yeah.
For the first time I'd met somebody that didn't do impressions but could copy mannerisms.
Yes. Where had he performed up until that point?
He hadn't. He was just making customers laugh in the shop.
Okay, right.
But he wasn't doing impressions.
No budding entertainer would be complete without a microphone, so the young Mike had to improvise.
So, pass me that sweeper, would you, then?
What, this?
Yeah, Charlotte, that's it. That's it, a U-bank.
And U-bank?
This is a U-bank
okay.
Carpet sweeper.
Hello, Mike. I remember you used to wander around a lot. You couldn't keep still, whatever you were doing, putting your hats on all over the room. And then one day I thought, how can I keep him standing still? So I had a brainwave. And I brought this in. Do you remember this? the carpet sweeper. And believe it not, this is the actual one we use. My mother wouldn't part with it for the world now. Stood it up and we used it as a mock stand mic. That kept you stood still all right, didn't it? And also your hands free to put your hats on.
And one week I turned up without it. And I went, where's the U-bag? I had to go home and pick it up.
She did. With his microphone technique honed on a carpet sweeper, the next step for Mike was to face a real audience for the first time.
The U-Tree was a pub. And if you weren't sitting down at 7 o'clock at night, you were never going to get a seat, because it was a very, very keen place.
It's quite brutal. So if somebody wasn't any good, the whole room would start talking through your act.
His material was good, and there was no doubting his talent as a mimic, but there was a huge problem. Yarwood had always suffered from extreme performance anxiety.
I'm a nervous person, I'm a little bit shy.
Started doing talent competitions, I would be physically sick before I went on.
He was sick before he went on and sick after he came off. Wherever it was, the Palladium, wherever, I mean, we all knew that about Mike.
In the wings, Yarwood was a nervous wreck. However, as soon as he set foot on the stage, something changed. He was no longer the shy Mike Yarwood. He was Tommy Cooper, Harold Wilson, or Ken Dodd.
But he was brilliant, you know, and then it started moving for Mike. There was a new kid on the block.
Mayo got him a TV gig on Comedy Bandbox, a review show, which was the leading proving ground for British comedians at that time.
I did a warm-up at ABC Television in Didsbury, Manchester. A producer liked it. 2 weeks later, I was on the show, and that was my first television show.
During the 60s, he moved back and forth between ITV and the BBC, on shows such as Sunday Night at the London Palladium or BBC Two's Three of a Kind, with Lulu and Ray Fell. He also appeared as a guest star, bringing his impersonations to a wider audience.
I bet you can't do that one, Derek Nimmo.
Oh, well, I know. In the end, Bill Cotton, I think it was, at the BBC, who could see the potential, and putting the right producer with him was a brilliant stroke, and Mike just fell into it and was a natural. A
familiar face on TV, in 1971, Mike got his big break when Billy Cotton gave him his own primetime slot on the BBC. The face of Saturday night television was about to change forever.
But this evening I've been asked to tell you of my achievements during my premiership, and I have a list of them here.
If you were an entertainer, what you wanted more than anything else in terms of your career was to be on television on Saturday night.
Saturday night was the most important night of the week for the BBC to prove that it could reach the whole audience.
Saturday night television was where the whole family came together to watch the great shows. The Mike Yarwood Show, Parkinson, Match of the Day. These were big, big juggernaut programmes, and watching them together with the family was a very collective experience, a shared experience.
Diana and I have always watched your programmes when we've got nothing better to do.
Not only was he current and did impressions of people of the day, it was good, wholesome family entertainment on a Saturday night. You'd never feel you couldn't have 3 generations watching and laughing at the same thing.
Hello, children. I'm Paddington Bear. Well, I'm not really. I'm Dennis Healy. But with my policies, now and again, I have to disguise myself.
He was hugely famous. People forget it now, but he was the biggest thing on television in those days.
Maggie asked me at the House of Commons Christmas party if I would kiss her under the mistletoe. I said I wouldn't kiss her under anaesthetic.
You think about 70s comedy, a lot of it was kind of, you know, racist jokes, Irish jokes, you know, all that kind of stuff. He didn't rely on that. He was kind of, you know, beyond that. He was something cleverer than that.
The audiences recognised that here was one of them. He was an ordinary guy. He didn't come on all flash. Mike was never I am. Mike was always one of the audience, I think, who was then going to do something that was extraordinary.
Of course, Christmas is a family occasion, but things can be different if you've got an addition to the family, like Mr. and Mrs. Bruce Forsyth. All right, Anthony, we're going to play a game for Christmas, and it's called Changing the Napkin. All right? So what we're going to... Oh, yeah, Auntie, right. What we're going to do now is, first of all, we're going to get the talcum powder here, talcum powder here. So she's not very quick at this, I'm afraid. We could have trained a chimp quicker.
What a joy it must have been to have appeared on Mike's show. You knew it was going to be so funny and so full of warmth. You can see the joy in the faces of those who appear on there. To get Paul McCartney, to get people of this great calibre, and they knew that they would have a very, very enjoyable time.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, meet our very special guests with their smash hit record. Ladies and gentlemen, Wings.
Paul McCartney had a new single he wanted to promote. He phoned Bill Cotton and said, "What's your biggest show on Christmas Day?" And he said, "I've got Mike Yarwood on Christmas Day." So Paul wanted to come on the Mike Yarwood show to promote his new single. And he wanted Linda with him, his wife. So they hastily put together some sketches, and Mike's producer, Jim Moyer at that time, said to Paul, "Look, would you perform these sketches with Mike?" And Paul was an absolute gentleman. He was lovely.
Somebody to see you, love.
Well, I'm busy at the moment. Do I have to?
Well, I think you should. He says he's the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Oh, he's not collected in person these days, is he?
Obviously, the big one is ABBA. We went to see a recording of a Christmas show where ABBA were the guests. I must have been quite small and quite little, and so I was at eye height to the girls' knee boots, and they had these sequin catsuits. I think one of them was in bright pink sequins and the other one was in sort of electric blue sequins, and they had these matching suede knee boots, and I just remember I'd never seen anything like it, and I was just absolutely fixated with the knee boots. I've never forgotten that.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Bucks Fizz.
For the next 16 years, the stars turned out in force for Mike every week. Who could forget these chart toppers in 1981?
Guys, cheers.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Ooh, we're spelling it.
Long time left.
Yes.
About that tall.
Yes, I was 8 years old. You would have been 10.
Yep.
And
Yarwood developed a reputation for being an absolute perfectionist. His daughters Claire and Charlotte are meeting up with Mike, Jay and Cheryl from the original Bucks Fizz lineup to get a sense of the thrill of working with their dad.
Do you remember meeting us?
Yes, I had your
Were you all
autograph on my
soppy and
mirror.
shy and everything?
Yes, absolutely. But we were
I
never
remember
interested.
you. I remember
Yeah,
you.
we were never so much interested in the impressions of the politicians.
care
but
what he was
we
doing,
wanted
no.
the pop groups,
Yeah, the
and,
dancers,
yeah,
and that was super glamorous.
So tell us about that year. Tell us what was happening for you that year.
It was the first live performance we'd ever done since winning the Eurovision Song Contest.
It changed everything.
Yeah.
Yarwood's unassuming manner when not performing almost led to him being mistaken for someone else. But he was always unfailingly polite.
I remember
You'll
coming
never
to the
guess.
dressing room to meet us. I remember that.
Do you?
Yeah, came up to the dressing room, knocked on the door, and I said, "Who is it?" Like, joking around. He said, "It's Mike." I said, "Mike who?" He said, "Mike Yarwood." I said, "Oh, yeah. Hi."
Oh.
But he was a real gentleman. He was really, really nice.
Lovely.
First thing he says, "Congratulations on all this success you've had. We've only won the Eurovision, but that was plenty."
That's kind of a
Coming
big
from
deal.
you.
You won the Eurovision?
Yeah, we hadn't had number one yet.
To do your dad's Christmas show, it was the big show, you know. It was, and to be invited to do it was just so special.
Do you remember sitting down to watch it on Christmas Day with your families?
Oh, yeah,
of course,
everybody.
yeah.
It was just amazing how we could turn it on and how we could use his facial expressions and maybe get a pipe or put a hat on or a pair of glasses. And he was so believable.
He was great.
Very
His
good.
show was so good, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
It's really good.
He was such a clever bloke.
Mike Yarwood turned his natural talent for uncanny impressions into a brilliant career.
It can take a long time, and I watch television all the time when I've got the free time. I just keep watching television and till it comes, you know.
He'd got muscles in his face that I didn't have, like he could move things. He could make his face go fatter or thinner. I don't know how.
It was quite a remarkable thing to watch. He would sit in the makeup department at the BBC, be very quiet, and there'd be some very talented ladies around, and he would just sit there and stare into the screen. It was quite remarkable, really.
It's playing mind games with yourself, I think. It's making yourself believe that you actually are that person. He was a genius.
What a beautiful day. What a beautiful day today, ladies. What a beautiful day for shoving a corned beef sandwich down Rudolph Nureyev's tights. And saying, how about that for a packed lunch? No.
All through the 1970s and most of the 1980s, Mike Yarwood was riding high in the television ratings.
This is a typical BBC do this. Typical, yes. And no, it was going to be an orgy. They had to cancel it. Yes. Someone trod on a grape.
Confident and bold when performing, this was in stark contrast to his life off stage. There he was shy and retiring, especially when it came to meeting girls.
I was always shy. I used to get other people to make the initial approach. And it was the same with Sandra, my wife. I met Sandra on the programme. I was about 3 weeks plucking up the courage to ask her out, and we were sort of courting for about 12 months, and then we got married.
He lived at home with his mum and dad until, in Stockport, until he met my mum and married her. His mum doted on him a bit, and then he went straight from having everything done for him at home to marrying my mum and moving in with her, and she probably took up the reins of looking after him at home. He never really had to function in the real world, so, you know, we always used to joke about it, like he wouldn't know how to use a cash point, or he wouldn't know how to navigate a multi-storey car park, or all those basic things that everybody does in life.
Everything in our household really revolved around his career. So my mother was a stay-at-home mum. She was kind of his PA, and she was absolutely key in allowing him to pursue that important part of his career.
He would always have an A4 lined notepad, sort of jotter pad on his desk, and he would write jokes, and sometimes he would test them out on us, and often they might go over our heads, but he always loved testing out jokes on my mum as well, because that's actually one thing that all four of us have in common. We've got quite a silly sense of humour. We laugh a lot as a family.
He would not be able to have a conversation with us without going into the voice of whoever was in his life at the time, whether it was Prince Charles or Robin Day or, you know, a politician. And I think that was his natural state of being. He couldn't not do that.
Ooh. What a pity the party's over and I've just arrived.
School children were doing frank and simplistically and amusingly. But Mike was far nearer the truth. I think he took his work very, very seriously. He would study characters for months. It is very flattering, especially when it's really good. Of the Impressionists, he was the governor.
It's me on the telly being mimicked again. I've had a lot of harassment this week. On Monday, I went to a jumble sale and somebody bought me.
Come and have a look.
After Mike's last TV show, some of his props were put in storage. After many years, Claire and Charlotte have rediscovered them and hope there are some surprises in store.
I mean, some of this is iconic stuff. Fez, Tommy Cooper.
Look, those got no lenses in.
They look either like maybe Michael Foot, Robin Day, possibly.
Yeah.
Don't
they
know.
Look like Ronnie
Corbett.
Ronnie Barker.
We're probably totally wrong. Right, so what else have we got?
Top hats. I don't know
Top
what
hats.
those would have been.
Eric Morecambe, I can see him in.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. He loved being Frank Sinatra. He loved being Charles.
Yeah, I was
Prince
gonna say
Charles,
Charles,
at the
yeah.
time, now King Charles.
King
That was a
Charles,
big favourite.
Last night I helped my mother decorate the Christmas tree. We gave it the Order of the Garter, 2 CB.
He absolutely was very fussy about who he would mimic.
I mean, I think that's it. He liked doing
the creme de la creme.
Yeah.
And there are some other personal documents that give an indication of his character.
Look, school reports.
From his school?
Oh, my gosh.
Oh.
Writing. Shows sign of improvement.
Good.
Art, very interested. Michael dreams in class. Oh, and does not pay attention. He could concentrate much more
but he does not try very hard.
Oh, I'm
What,
not
you were
happy.
7 years old.
7. Singing
And good for singing.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Oh. Look, there's some notes here that look like script. It's a running order and a column for music, a column for props, a column for hats.
The way he mapped out his creative process is super interesting.
To learn more about how her dad would breathe life into his characters and create such amazing shows, Claire is meeting up with fellow impressionist John Culshaw.
John, so lovely to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for coming to talk to me. What I have found here, which I can't wait to show you, is some of his notes and plans.
Now look at this. David Frost, Dave Allen, Larry Grayson. Wonderful, familiar characters to get an act started. David Frost, to call everything to order. Hello, good evening, and welcome.
Hello, good evening, and welcome.
Safe pair of hands.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
The audience will get started, and then Larry Grayson will give that lovely flourish.
But, you know, I've had a terrible job getting mounted recently. You know, don't you? He knows.
So can you talk to me at all about this question that my dad has been asked his entire life?
Yes.
And I don't think I've ever heard him give a proper answer to it, but how do you get the voices?
This is where it gets hard to explain.
Yeah.
Seeing the person in your mind's eye, and then what you're trying to do then is get the voice and the sound to match what you're seeing, so it runs together harmoniously.
When you've talked to him over the years, has he discussed that with you?
When your dad mentioned a character, Ken Dodd, the look that happened behind the eye and transformed his entire face, your dad had vanished, and Ken Dodd had not just appeared, but appeared like a truck coming through the wall.
Hasn't it been a lovely Christmas? Hasn't it been a lovely Christmas, Mrs.? A lovely Christmas for doing something daft.
And sometimes it just comes down to just a little pause or a little look to the side, and that can be the difference between, you know, quite a nice laugh and taking the roof off.
Yeah. And in fact, there's some impressions he did where he could walk on and just say nothing, and people know what's coming, and they're just waiting, and then they're laughing, and he hasn't said a word yet.
Can somebody come on? Hey, look at that.
He wasn't the first to do accurate impressions, but what he managed to do was to create a personality that seemed to extend from what we'd actually seen in real life.
Well, good evening and welcome to the sky. Now pay attention because I've got my eye on you.
He just lived the character, and he lived the character, and that's why it was so good. And that's why, I don't know, I've not seen some great impressionists, sound impressionists today, but I haven't seen anybody who has done as much as cleverly since him.
But Mike's skill at being other people was hiding a troubling secret, and one he tried to disguise from the world.
The impressions he chose to do were his protectors.
For the first time I did a Royal Variety, I have never been so terrified in all my life. So once I got into the impersonations, I felt as though I was guarded by them, and they were doing it for me, you know.
He found being himself really hard.
Mike Yarwood was both the voice and the face of the celebrities of the day. He could do over 200 impersonations of entertainers, sportspeople, singers, royalty, and of course, politicians.
He had sort of quite a bland face. His features weren't distinctive, which meant that he could make his figures become anybody he wanted by cocking an eyebrow or just popping his eyes. He could become Bob Monkhouse.
You're going to hear some voices on Bob's Big Box Game.
I worked with Mike once, and he said, "Oh, you're very different to the way I did things. You see, I was always more interested in the physicality of people, the way they move their faces, the way they move their bodies, and you're all about the voice. You're all about the voice, you know. It's very impressive, very impressive." And he did do that very well.
So, could he, I mean, it has been said, hasn't it? Maybe I've said it myself or somebody.
He said to me once, "Have you noticed that Michael Parkinson has stopped picking his fingers and scratching his head ever since I started impersonating him doing them?"
I've never really considered myself to be strictly a vocal impressionist. I mean, back in the 70s, for about 3 years, I did a radio series, but I didn't really enjoy doing it because it was too restricting, you know. I wanted to be seen, I wanted to... But even on radio, if I was imitating someone, I would still pull the face, you know.
He was looking not just at the voice, the tone of the voice, but the physicality, the way the shoulders went, the way the head went, the way the eyes went, the way the hat went, the way the hands. And then he exaggerated it. With Bruce Forsyth, hello, all right, my love's most important.
All right, my love, all right, Anthea.
Bruce used to say to us, because I was doing the generation game, I do go, all right, my love's most important. I said, yes, you do.
Thank you so much, and welcome to our show. And I can't tell you, I've got a bit of a thick head today, I can tell you, yeah.
Larry Grayson, you know, it says here, you know, he saw the physical, oh, looks like a nice day. And he saw the physicality of the Specs and Grace, and he'd look and say,
Which one? No, I can't do it if you make me laugh. I've heard that somewhere before.
What eventually happened is you learnt how to do his impressions.
Well, folks, I hope you can stick around because we've got some really fabulous guests tonight. We've got the greatest entertainer in the world, but that's enough about me.
All people who do impressions are musical. You'll never meet one who hasn't got a musical ear, because doing an impression of somebody is pitching a note. So if you hear somebody going, blah, 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 you've got to go blah, 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 blah. You've got to copy the notes.
I've got you under my skin.
The minute he said, I'm Frank Sinatra, he sang in tune. Unbelievable. Sing as Mike Yarwood, flat as a pancake.
But Mike was still able to poke fun at himself.
But in 5 shows, I've only had 6 complaints about my singing. 1 from the musical director and the other 5 from the people who wrote the songs I sang.
I said, why did you do that, Daddy? And he said, because I was a frustrated singer. He wanted to be Frank Sinatra.
My little town blues are melting away.
We grew up in a lovely village in the north of England, and we had a really nice house, and there was a particular room that we called the Pink Room that had weird 70s kind of pink silky wallpaper. And you could very often find my dad in there with a Frank Sinatra album on, who he, you know, couldn't get enough of, loud as anything, using a biro to conduct this big band, you know, number. Opened his eyes to find blue splatters of biro all over the silky 70s wallpaper. And my mum went, you know, nuts, but it's like, oh, Michael!
Some of Yarwood's characters were caricatures, but others were often eerily accurate, like Ken Dodd.
What a beautiful day. What a beautiful day today, ladies. What a beautiful day.
I'd like to say, how tickled I am, Mrs. How full of foolishness, though.
And Tommy Cooper.
I've got to sit here. I couldn't get a seat in the audience.
I went to see my doctor. I had to. He's ill.
My absolute favourites, however, were Steptoe and Son.
Have you any idea what it's been like for me having to live with a dirty little man like you? I'm not a dirty little man. I have a bath every August bank holiday Monday, whether I need it or not.
But he'd do the one camera over there, and then straight away he'd go back to do that one, and then back to that one. You dirty old man. Me, Harold? Yes, you. I'm not. Yes, you are. And that is so difficult to do, technically. And that was always my favourite moment.
But the Mike Yarwood Show wasn't just moving the art of impressions forward. By using new camera techniques, it revolutionised the whole light entertainment genre.
He was not just happy of doing an impression. He said, how can I talk, one impression talk to another impression? How do we do that? So I created the split screen technique where he was on one side of the screen, there was a little soft edge split in the middle, and he was on the other side of the screen.
Hysterical. Say, who are those 2 strange men? That's Patrick Moore and Tony Benn. Well, did you ever? What a swell party this is.
He was able
to talk to himself as two different characters in a sketch, or even three different characters. And so using the medium in that way enabled him to go beyond just standing up and doing impressions.
Climb upon my knee, Sonny boy. Knees? They're more like brass bed knobs.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I was transfixed. It was this split screen, which again now is, you know, everybody goes, he was a pioneer at the time.
Celebrity Challenge Tournament. Asking the questions, Bamba Gascoigne. Right, let's begin. Your start of 10, hands on buzzers or anything you've got handy.
Those days were exhausting. I'd have to be this character, talk there, and then finish that one, go back into makeup, be in makeup another 45 minutes maybe, change the character, come back, and then slot that in.
Hi, Bob, how are you? Ronnie, I feel like $100.
Oh, you mean $1 million?
No, 100. That's after tax.
Mike was absolutely a pioneer for impressions on television and in entertainment generally. He was the first to have all of this technology at hand and great sketches and beautiful observations and have them tumble out at the speed of light in this beautifully crafted way.
Yarwood's impressions of fellow showbiz personalities had his audiences in stitches.
One of the 7 wonders of the world is Ken Dodd going on stage to do his act and coming off the same day.
But his mimicry of politicians remained some of his most memorable moments.
Nobody had been doing this before. I mean, Churchill had been impersonated many times, but I had a bit of originality when I started.
Give me your budget, give me your cash, and leave the rest to me.
All the people that I impersonate, I look upon them as sort of clients. I know most of the people I impersonate, and I like to be able to look them in the eye and know that I haven't offended them, because I don't believe in being cruel.
Mike took care not to lampoon his characters too much, which led to some surprisingly close relationships with the people he impersonated.
I'm Dennis. I'm Denise. He's a menace. He's a tease.
They were queuing up to have him do an impression of them, whether it be Harold Wilson or Ted Heath. It made them more popular and possibly softened the way the public thought about them if he was talking about them. And I think as well, when he did do an impression of those politicians, he wasn't actually doing it to make a political statement. It was more to make you laugh. That was the most important thing when it came to Mike. Laughter. Bomb, bomb! See what I did then?
Well, of course, I think what this country needs today is an effective leader. Someone who can win 3 out of 4 elections, 2 Eurovision Song Contests and a World Cup. Ted, what do you think about me?
Well, of course, I try not to.
The politicians were more fun to get at because they were so serious in Parliament, and all of a sudden he said, "Oh, what a silly Billy."
In fact, I've decided to put a tax on goats in the Scilly Isles. In other words, the silly billies.
These serious politicians who would never... Oh, Fred Ted Heath doing this.
He came as a guest on the Parkinson show with an incredible billing, Sir Harold Wilson. We didn't think we'd get the two to appear together, and if anything, the Prime Minister was more anxious to appear than Mike himself.
I actually gave catchphrases to people, which is amazing. Yeah. Yes, I
What I don't think we'd anticipated was the instant chemistry between them.
Huey Green has never said, "I mean that most sincerely," not to my knowledge. Max Bygraves has never said, "I want to tell you a story." And as far as I know, Sir Harold has never said, "And I said this at the Brighton Conference." You thought you were going to get the whole show without me, didn't you? Well, no way, baby.
I mean, I used to do a thing with Harold Wilson where I'd leave the pipe in the mouth and then instead of taking it out, I'd just let it drop out of my mouth and he'd catch it. Sometimes just to get a round of applause on the stage.
His impressions were generous. He was giving you that person brought to life and made more amusing. And the people he was doing didn't mind being done by him. In fact, it was the ultimate accolade. If Mike Yarwood's doing you, you've arrived.
All the time his shows were riding high in the ratings, there was one person who didn't tune in on a Saturday night to watch.
He absolutely didn't want to watch them.
But not a lot of people knew that about
If he was going to watch something, he would be standing up, he would be smoking, he would be pacing, and it would be quite an unpleasant experience because he would see something he didn't like. So that was a bit stressy for him.
No, I don't like myself on television, no. If you said to me, would you like us to play this interview back, I'd say, well, thanks all the same, but I'm not bothered.
He was definitely most comfortable and most happy around his family. He felt safe there.
He just seemed to really crave almost like disappearing when he wasn't performing, and he could switch it on for the cameras, but then when he came home, he just wanted a quiet life. He just wanted to be left alone. He didn't want anyone to come to the house. He didn't want to socialise. Just wanted to be with my mum and my sister and me and just be left alone, really.
It was a really welcome relief from the differing world of showbiz and, you know, having to perhaps perform as himself.
And when Mike was playing himself, there was sometimes a reminder that he was actually a self-conscious and slightly awkward man.
But he actually, when he was with the Ivy Benson band, he had 3 passionate love affairs. And I was wondering what they might think about the political situation as it is today.
He would be in his dressing room quite nervous before we'd go out and do the sketches. And I was always surprised at that, because I'd think, well, you're Mike Yarwood, you know, why are you nervous? You're the great Mike Yarwood, you're the master, the king.
He was incredibly shy. I don't know how he walked onto a stage sometimes with, you know, with 2,000 people sitting out there. But he did it, and he seemed to grow 6 inches as he walked onto the stage. It was amazing.
The impressions he chose to do were his protectors.
For the first time I did a raw variety, I have never been so terrified in all my life. So once I got into the impersonations, I felt as though I was guarded by them, and they were doing it for me, you know.
Once that wig was on, or once that voice was there, all those mannerisms, he was no longer himself, and he could say anything to anyone, whether it be on a show or just in a social situation. He would often walk into a social situation as somebody else.
If we threw an after-show party and the great and the good turned up, he never interacted with anybody.
He found being himself really hard.
I think many impressionists would tell you that, in a way, we are comfortable being other people. And with Mike, there was a kind of engaging shyness.
I came to work with him on his autobiography, Impressions of My Life. And that was an interesting experience, because if you're helping somebody with their autobiography, you hope that they will tell you something about themselves. And Mike Yarwood didn't really want to talk about himself. He talked about his shyness a bit, but you even had to coax him to talk about that.
Mike's reclusive nature also had an impact on his family.
Our father was extremely famous at that point in time. So that meant Claire and I were within that, you know, framework, and that did make things different. We occasionally watched TV together and that kind of thing, but it was kind of rare. It wasn't part of growing up.
He didn't drive us to see friends. He didn't sort of do things like come to school plays or anything like that, because I think he found that really difficult. And even if we went to restaurants, and he would always be stopped and asked for autographs and things. I think he just preferred to not go out.
There was one particularly horrible teacher that said, just because your father's on television doesn't make you special. And I hadn't thought I was special. My mother was very, very key in making sure we remained grounded.
On TV, Mike was at the top of his game, but at home, the pressures of fame meant that cracks were starting to show.
I had known from very early on that my dad did not have a good relationship with alcohol.
I was working too much, and my drinking was out of control most of the time.
1, 2, 3. 3, 4.
In 1979, Mike Yarwood would face one of his biggest challenges to date.
When Jim Callaghan lost the 1979 election, I thought, oh dear, now we've got a lady Prime Minister. What am I going to do?
Some of us here would like to be taken seriously.
Margaret Thatcher appeared on the scene, and from dominating with Healy and Callaghan and Heath, here was this female Prime Minister, and that's a different challenge, and it's one which she attempted.
The man who had made his career impersonating male politicians struggled to mimic the new PM, Margaret Thatcher.
Tell me something, is Maggie coming home?
No, not Maggie. He can't do Maggie.
But help arrived in the form of female impressionist Janet Brown.
Please don't stand up. I prefer you kneeling.
He couldn't do Margaret Thatcher, so I booked Janet Brown to be on Mike's programme every week. But we didn't tell Mike.
But Mr. Parkinson,
No, please call me Michael.
Thank you. And you can call me Mrs. Thatcher.
Janet Brown's Mrs. Thatcher was a triumph. But there was another problem for Yarwood. Suddenly, fewer people were watching his shows.
The moment they moved him from Christmas Day to Boxing Day, he sort of thought, are these the signs? Should I make that move now?
As expectations went up, his confidence and insecurity grew. That's when the option came up of, do we switch to Thames, who would pay more than double the money?
Thames particularly was in the habit of trying to take stars that had had their run at the BBC and take them on, like they did with Morecambe and Wise and Des O'Connor. So Mike was the natural progression to come over.
What Mike wanted to do was to expand upon what he was doing at the BBC. I think he wanted to involve song and dance. He wanted to have bigger production values.
He wanted to do some song and dance men, like Tommy Steele, Bruce Forsyth, like Danny LaRue. So he wanted to become involved, and he wanted me to choreograph him in a production number, which he subsequently opened every show with.
ITV and BBC were very, very different then. In a way, they still are. You know, every channel has its identity. That's why they exist. So the demands on you, what they'll accept from you, are different. And some people thrive on that, and some people don't. But yeah, that's a difficult transition to make.
What Mike had at the BBC was a fantastic entertainment department that knew exactly what he needed, exactly how it worked, and they'd learnt that over many years with him, you know, doing the show over and over. You know what works, what doesn't work. And when you move channels with new people, they've got to go through that learning curve. So it's quite a risk.
There was more glitz, glamour and grander budgets, but this did nothing to allay Mike's personal troubles, which had travelled to Thames with him.
He went to Thames because it was the beginning and the end. You know, he was on a slippery slope. The commercial stations had never protected anybody in the way the BBC protected people.
And Thatcher's Britain was at its peak, sweeping away both the old guard of politicians and light entertainment stars alike.
Saying an intelligent budget, a thoughtful budget, a clever budget. Brilliant, eh? We've got 4 million unemployed. What have they done? Put the price of fags up. I mean, that'll solve it, won't it?
A new breed of funny was in town, and comedy from the likes of Mike Yarwood looked increasingly out of touch.
He'd been on the crest of a wave with the kinds of people he could impersonate who were national figures. Boundaries of taste move on. The audience had moved on a bit.
The whole comedy scene got more darkly political with the new sort of alternative comedians, if you like, led by Ben Elton and everybody. Spitting Image was around at that time as well and being much more brutal.
Don't you talk to my bird like that.
I am not your bird.
Spitting Image gave the whole idea of mimicry and edge that Mike did not bring to it deliberately. Mike was a family entertainer. There was nothing cruel about him.
Once Splitting Image started, Mike sort of decided that he couldn't compete with the acid in a satirical way. And he stepped back. He did some cabarets and television slowly down.
I've forgotten who I was doing now. Hang on a minute. Oh, yeah.
The sort of old-fashioned, as it was seen even then, club variety comedy was, I mean, wasn't just overtaken, it was kind of looked down on in a strange way. It was a changing of the guard, for sure.
The pressure was intense. Not only was he being somebody else all the time, there was the workload, there was more characters to be learnt, and then there were more costumes to be put on, more makeup to be done, and it, I think, to an extent, it overwhelmed him.
Except you and me. People didn't talk about mental health, stress, all the rest of it. You know, you come from a humble beginning like Mike Yarwood, the stress and the pressure to keep it up, because then people have got expectations of you. You're under all that stress and pressure. And the obvious safety valve was drinking.
I had known from very early on that my dad did not have a good relationship with alcohol. I would say, 5, 6, 7. Didn't know what the words to describe that were, but we knew as a family, and certainly my mother knew, that he had a drink problem and it was getting worse and worse.
I first realised I had a dependence on drink is when I discovered that it was its own antidote, that I needed it in the morning to take away the horrors that the drinking the night before had done. It's a paradox that my most successful years, I look back with a lot of sadness and unhappiness. One of the saddest things I can think of is I missed my first daughter's first birthday because I was too hungover,
In 1985, Mike's personal life hit a painful crossroads, which would change him forever. His wife of 16 years, Sandy, separated from him. They continued to work together and were amicably divorced 2 years later, but the family was split down the middle.
I was totally to blame. Our marriage was rocking about a bit in the late 70s due to my way of life,
My brilliant mother could no longer deal with his drinking. That was the sadness about that. She had given him many, many, many chances to change and to sort that out, but his drinking became something that affected her deeply, all of us really, but she just could not live with that any longer. And so she had to get out of that.
She was so sad about it because she still loved him. It was just desperately sad because neither of them wanted to break up, but the drink was just in the way. And there was, you can't stop drinking for someone else.
By the late 1980s, the private life of Mike Yarwood, Mr. Saturday Night, who had been one of the biggest entertainers of all time, was off the rails.
My drinking was out of control most of the time. I mean, I was on and off it and trying to, in the earlier part I was younger and I could cope a little bit better, but then it got bad.
But finding himself single and unhappy wasn't the only problem for Mike.
Mike was not really in a fit state, decided to get up on stage and do an act. And we all thought this was not a good idea because he was drunk.
Mike Yarwood was about to face public humiliation and turn his back on the world.
The girls all adore me, do anything for me. I sometimes wonder how I ever keep it up. My accent.
I can remember taking a meeting with Mike towards the end of his television era, where we argued deeply about changing the impressions.
He was scared to try new things. So on the way up, I suppose if he made a mistake or he did an impression, it didn't work, it didn't matter as much. So he started to stay with the successful characters he'd created And where it had previous sketches that had worked, he stayed with that.
His great success was being an innovator. And I think that driving force was no longer there.
Then in 1987, ITV suddenly pulled the plug on his last Saturday night peak time series.
The show ran for 16 consecutive years, and the pressure was on all the time. Is it going to be funny? Are the scripts okay? Am I doing too many shows?
Nobody wants you when you're old and grey. There'll be some changes.
So suddenly, there was no longer a Mike Yarwood show. And, you know, that's got a sting, hasn't it? So I do remember, you know, this sense that was a rejection.
They were pretty dark times. His marriage had ended, his career was not looking promising anymore. He had nothing else. He couldn't do anything else, and he didn't want to do anything else. So he definitely became worryingly isolated.
That was the period of time when he had to hit rock bottom before he could stop drinking.
Alcohol was increasingly dominating Mike's life. Becoming more reclusive, he'd managed to keep it as a private matter, but that was all about to change.
A whole bunch of us were invited to go out to LA for the inaugural Virgin flight to Los Angeles. Most of us were down in first class on the bottom level, and I think Mike was upstairs.
Our dad was invited. We both got to go. We were kind of a buy one, get one free situation. He did not like flying. He only did that, I think, to make us happy, because he knew we wanted to go so badly and it was going to be such fun. So this great big aeroplane was full of actors, actresses, models, you know, interesting people of the time.
And press.
And the press.
All the journalists had come up our end because we were having the party. The mood of this particular jaunt was extremely lively.
He had a drink on the plane and then another and another. So we're like, this is incredible. Aren't we lucky? Isn't this amazing? But Daddy's had a drink or two or 8. So now what's going to happen?
The plane touched down several hours later, and the great and the good were ferried to a luxury hotel. In the evening, Sir Richard Branson, owner of Virgin Atlantic, threw a big party.
I think a couple of the comics were getting up and doing turns, you know, impromptu improvisation in front of a microphone at this party, and a lot of alcohol had been taken. Mike was not really in a fit state, decided to get up on stage and do an act. And we all thought this was not a good idea because he was drunk. But he got a lot of encouragement. So this happens, and it was embarrassing. It was not good. It marred the night. He wasn't in a fit state to do this, but they let him do it, and they let him carry on doing it. And I didn't see much of Mike. Again, I think he took to his room, to be totally honest with you.
I can remember I'm sobbing. The paramedics have been to see Dad. They've sedated him. They say, don't think he's had a heart attack. He's probably had a mixture of alcohol and some anxiety medication that we was taking at the time, and it was just not a good combination. Door knocks. I open the door, and there is Mr. Branson, and I'm covered in mascara. And I said, Richard, you better come in. And I shut the door. Quietest, gentlest man I'd spoken to for a long time. And I said, I need to tell you something. Dad's not very well. He has a drink problem, and it's become evident that he's really, really unwell, and we've had the ambulance here, haven't we?
He just said, right, you go and get some fresh air, sort yourself out, and I'll sit with your dad for a bit. And
it makes me want to cry thinking about it, because it was one of the kindest, you know, outreaches to us that we experienced in a time that was so turbulent and difficult.
I arrived back in London, got a newspaper, and there it was, front page. Cannot express how upset I was about this. And I rang, and I said, I want to talk to the editor. I said, it was so unnecessary to tell that story. He's not well. And what you've done is just made it 10 times worse.
The disastrous trip to America had opened the floodgates to the press, and the tabloids waded in.
I can remember our mum shutting all the curtains downstairs and telling us to crawl along the carpet.
Because a journalist had walked around the back of the house and was looking in through the sitting room windows.
And we were just like, OK, let's do that then.
Let's just sit really still and be really quiet.
I think what we experienced was this kind of relentless intrusion, this everyday, in a private setting kind of following.
It wasn't reporting about his work, it was reporting about his private life, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and
often not accurate.
Like the one which said that he was drinking because his wife had died.
She wasn't dead.
She's still very much alive.
Yeah. You couldn't go anywhere or do anything without something horrid being on the paper the next day. It was all feeding off this part of a man's life that was not happy and not good, and it was selling newspapers, and it was difficult for our family.
There's also a difference between people who want to be a celebrity.
Yeah.
And I don't think, you know, the fame was ever why my dad was in it. No. He was in it for the craft and the work he was doing, and this was, you know, what came with it.
Every article written on him was killing him. After reading all the press at the time, you knew he had a problem and he was not solving it. The press helped finish him off in a way.
After the tumultuous trip to LA, Mike began to entirely shy away from the public eye. But that didn't stop the offers of work from pouring in.
He was being offered different kinds of shows, game shows and things like that. He just didn't want to do them.
99 times out of 100, he would say no, he didn't want to do it. Sometimes he'd be tempted to be involved. But he seemed to be relatively content to sit at home.
Mike had time to reflect and discovered a newfound solace away from the bright lights and endless pressure of showbiz. And in 1990, he finally kicked drinking for good.
He says he had no more recovery left in him. He had no more hangovers left. He could not go through another recovery. I know he was heavily involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he just got more and more sober as those days and those weeks became months.
I'm sober. The important thing is I'm happy. If I never step on a stage again for the rest of my life, I've had a wonderful career.
Mike Yarwood would never make a regular return to our Saturday night TV screens. He appeared occasionally and somewhat reluctantly as a guest on shows like Have I Got News for You? And another showbiz great, friend Des O'Connor, tried to encourage a comeback with a guest spot on his show, but Mike's heart was no longer in it.
We persuaded him to come onto the Des Show, which was a semi-variety, semi-interview programme. And Des agreed. Here was an opportunity to give the public a taste of the old Mike Yarwood shows.
But as your Prime Minister, I will strain every sinew to try and bring down the terribly high rate of inflation that I have inherited from the last Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I met Mike in the mid-90s, just when we did a radio pilot and a TV pilot at the same time. A producer who I knew had got hold of the idea that Mike should make a comeback, that Mike should be back.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Taking Off with Yarwood, the show where I'll be introducing you to some of the best impressionists in the country. In fact, some of them are so good they'll be edited out.
It was a strange situation for him because he felt uncomfortable being put into this, but still he was a consummate professional, and I was terribly starstruck, as one only is when you meet your childhood heroes. I'm like, oh. And then I had to perform on the show, and I'm like, my Owen, my Owen.
I don't really think he wanted to be, but he gave it a go, and that's when I met him. It's the only time I met him, in fact, in those two occasions in the mid-90s.
Good night. Thank you very much.
TV executives decided not to commission the series, and Mike went back to the quiet, teetotal life he enjoyed so much.
Mike would often say, you know, when I've retired, I know my own mind, and that's it, I've retired. And he was always very clear about that. And I just think he knew his moment, and he felt... I remember Ronnie Barker describing when he'd done everything that he wanted to do, he knew that that was his moment, and right, we'll do something else now. And I think Mike felt that way.
It wasn't that he couldn't. It wasn't that the phone didn't ring. It wasn't that I or anybody else couldn't have created something for him. He just didn't want to do it.
Over the years, the great Mike Yarwood has slipped from the nation's consciousness, but there can be no doubting the achievements of this legend of Saturday night TV.
For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, that he has not. Two-sided things he really feels, and not the words. Upon who kneels to record shows, I took the blows. This is me. And did it my...
He's revered, not just by impressionists, but by comedians of that generation. And yes, it's true that maybe they are better remembered, but I think that's possibly because you date with the people that you did. And so, you know, do people remember Malcolm Muggeridge? Do people remember Robin Day? Do people remember those characters? That, whereas you can repeat Morecambe and Wise forever.
Eat your heart out, Des O'Connor. Nice to see ya.
You mean that muscle sailor really do?
Yes. What a beautiful day for doing something daft like shoving a marrow through a letterbox and shouting, "The Incredible Hulk's arrived." Bet this is a rude show.
To repeat it to a younger audience is very difficult, but I think people of my age and above would love to reminisce in Mike's brilliance. And if that meant a few kids came along for the ride, so be it. But it is a problem with impressionists.
Good evening.
In a way, you're always, in a way, the sort of the victim of your impressionists. Maybe it's they're getting their own back.
Even though Mike was no longer on our screens, he inspired a new generation of comedians.
I think between impersonators, there's a kindredness. You know, it may be competitive, but it's in a very benevolent way. When you're doing funny voices, you know, it's bound to be benevolent and, above all, fascinating, and there's a kindredness. So Mike was very, very generous.
I was a bit nervous at first, but Mike just put you at your ease completely. He was just, I think he was just such a, well, he's always just such a lovely fella. Put you at your ease. Because the thing about Mike is he loves comedy, and he wants people to make him laugh. He doesn't want to be the funny one. He wasn't ever the one who would sit there doing impressions. He wasn't one of those type people. He always wanted you to make him laugh.
It is very special when you meet your heroes, but also slightly disconcerting when you realise that they're humans and the frailties that, you know, that encompasses.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome one of my heroes, Mike Yarwood.
Then, out of the blue in August 2003, Mike made an impromptu appearance as the guest of comedian Bob Monkhouse at the Albany Comedy Club in London.
I feel like Dave Allen up here at the moment. Dave Allen. Oh my God, Jesus, you gotta stop this stuff.
This lost recording was discovered and finally broadcast in December 2016.
It was so moving, none of us knew in the audience that the special guest that night was your wonderful dad.
Right, I've seen a film of it,
Yeah.
yeah.
This was the last performance either of these titans of comedy would ever make. Bob died in December that year, but Mike would go on to live another 20 years. And whilst he never returned to the public eye, he was able to find pleasure as a family man and grandfather, spending time at home that his career had never allowed for. He passed away peacefully on the 8th of September, 2023.
It was very sudden. We knew that he wasn't in the best of health, but we'd been with him just a couple of days before, and certainly we weren't expecting him to die, no.
I would say that he is one of the most outstanding and original performers and innovative performers that we've ever seen in this country.
Dad had got to the age of 82, and perhaps We had forgotten about how important he had been to lots of people, either professionally or as viewers of his TV programme.
We've both changed how we look back over his story and his career, and I think we've both come to the conclusion that we feel a lot happier about how my dad's career ended.
This man was unique. He was the first impressionist to top a variety bill. He was the first impressionist to have his own television series in the manner in which he performed it. The number of firsts that he caused throughout his working career is unprecedented.
Mike was a good man. I think he was as they would say, a gentleman and a very talented man.
He has left a body of work behind that was good, really good, and that's something to be so proud of.
He was as good as the two runners. He was as good as, you know, Morecambe and Wise, and he's certainly as popular and as anticipated. And yet, we don't remember him in the same way, and that is a great shame.
For people that don't know Mike Yarwood, that have never heard of Mike Yarwood, well, they're missing something rather special.
His imagination, his professionalism, his inventiveness, also his own unique lovability, his own warmth, and the joy of just watching his craft. He will always be spoken of at the very top.
If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues raised in tonight's programme, please go to channel5.com/helplines for information and support. Next tonight, before the remote, you had to get off the sofa and switch channels to watch the greatest TV of the 60s. We turn back the clock, brand new, after the break.